Hello, and welcome to the Open Virtual Film Project. This is part 3D of my Unreal Skills for Film series, and is a quick breakdown of the Unreal asset naming conventions and folder structure. Links for the remainder of the series, as well as the deep dive videos on the various tools shown, are in the description. These tutorials are done in Unreal 4.26, however they have been tested in 4.27 and 5 early access, and when a difference between engine versions shows up, I will note it in the video. With that out of the way, let's get started by opening up the OVFP naming convention document. The easiest way to get to it the first time that you do is to open the OVFP plugin menu and click the green wrench, which will open a browser window of the OVFP plugin resources folder. And we're going for the documentation folder. And we want to create a copy of the OVFP naming conventions document, the folder flowchart, and the asset source short names document. I'm going to put them in my class project extra files folder in a documentation folder. This way you do not have to open Unreal to access these files in the future. We're going to start by opening the OVFP naming conventions document. Naming conventions are a vital part of any virtual production project and are the manner in which we generate file names for textures, meshes, materials, and the like. We call these objects assets. The naming convention that a particular show uses provides information about the file, who made it, and when it was made at an easy glance that can also be read by computers. Unfortunately, since computers are not quite as clever as we are yet, naming conventions have to be followed closely, or else when we do need to run scripts, bits of computer code that do fancy things, the computer will not know what to do with the file. On any particular show, all naming conventions within a department, and hopefully between departments, should be consistent. However, so long as you are consistent inside each of your own departments, it is easy enough to batch convert naming convention standards between each other. If your show has a particular naming convention standard established, you should use that. However, if there is none, I would like to offer up the OVFP standard I've been developing, and will be discussing it in the remainder of the video. It is what all of my scripts are based around, so if you deviate away from it too far, things can break, especially in UE and the bridges between UE and the content creation softwares. In the OVFP standard, we use two separate naming conventions, the first of which are the names we use in Unreal Engine, and the second is for the ones we use for files on the server. Generally, the file names on the server will be dictated by a studio standard and are more flexible within this particular pipeline. If you're looking for a server file name standard, I would suggest starting with this one. The second naming convention standard is for assets that go into Unreal. Due to technical and practical limitations, Unreal file names must be significantly shorter than our server file name standard. And if you can get the various different departments on board of using the same naming convention early on in the project, it will greatly alleviate problems further down in the pipeline, when art department turns over to previs or anyone turns over to VFX, for instance. The Unreal naming conventions follow a general format of a two-letter code of what it is. For instance, SM for static mesh, MI for material, TX for texture. Scrolling through the naming convention document will give you each of the different types of prefixes for the various different types of objects. It will also give you samples of any differences in the naming convention for each type of object. After the two-letter code follows an underscore and the package or environment name that you're currently working with. If you're downloading assets or textures from the internet or using assets from a company server, it is often useful to keep a document of short names of the different asset sources that you have been using. So in that same documentation folder, that asset sources short names document that we copied is a good metric for tracking the various different types of short names. So for instance, if I pull any textures from cc0textures.com, in the package environment name, I would use cc0 instead of cc0 textures. This keeps the names nice and short. Same thing with TextHaven for TextureHaven, MGS for Quixel Megascans. This tracking document is also super useful in case someone needs to go to a website to download a higher res version, or if you need clearance for particular assets that get used in the final production. After the package or environment name, there's another underscore, followed by the name of the particular asset, followed by another underscore, and a free write space. Certain assets follow a little bit more complicated of a naming convention, for instance textures, where at the very end of it there is an underscore suffix code. Do note that each of these sections is separated by an underscore and is written in camel case. So the first letter of each word is being capitalized with no spaces or other special characters. We'll go through a few samples to show you this naming convention standard. Also note that it is a good idea to include a number at the end of your asset name in case you are making more than one. So it is door01 instead of door. On larger shows, especially once things hit LED stage or VFX, certain assets need to be tracked in a more granular way, and one of the better ways to do this is to give the asset a unique ID code. So I might make a mesh called bucket03 and would name it in the following way. I'm going to jump to the meshes section of my naming convention and use this naming convention here. It is a mesh, so the first part is SM underscore, then it is in the tutorial level, so tutorial underscore, then we add a unique ID, in this case a string of 5 alphanumeric characters, WXTU8, and immediately followed by the common name bucket03. And that would be the entirety of this static mesh's name. Going into a slightly more complicated example, a base color texture of the same asset would be tx for texture underscore tutorial underscore wxtu8 bucket03 underscore handle for the material slot underscore col for the type of texture. It is quite useful to have the common name in the naming convention for easy searching through Unreal, but keep everything short and sweet. In this case, you might consider shortening tutorial to an official short name of TUT if you are worried about extremely long names. Unreal can handle at most 255 characters, including all of the folders that come before the name of the asset. Now that we have gotten an overview of how to name things when they come into a UE, join me in the next one, and let's start importing objects.